Hello everyone, and welcome to the talk on selling accessibility, about how to talk about accessibility with producers, publishers and investors in mobile games industry. My name is Alla. I work at Pixel Games. It's a mobile games publisher, and we work pretty closely with many different development teams of many different sizes and on all steps of production, from early prototyping to full-scale user acquisition. And today I want to talk about something I deal with regularly, about how to make the case for accessibility in a business-driven environment, such as mobile games development, and more particularly in negotiation talks with mobile games publisher about investment and marketing of a project. And I think this conversation would be useful to people of many different roles. You can be a solo developer or maybe a representative of a small studio who's looking for a publisher, and you just want to know how to argue for your commitment to accessibility in negotiations about the future of your project. Or maybe you're working inside a mobile studio and you want to drive change internally. The core challenge here is basically the same. You just need to get the people who make decisions to actually listen to you. And I want to start with something most of you probably experienced. But for example, you bring up accessibility at the meeting. Maybe you say that you want to make game more accessible to screen readers and dedicate more resources to that. Or maybe you want to make some mechanics easier for players with different needs to get through. And usually you get one of these responses. We don't have time for this in our current sprint, or what's going to be ROI on that, or maybe let's revisit this after launch. Sounds familiar? Well, at least it sounds familiar to me. And these responses can be quite frustrating, but they're not necessarily signs of bad intentions. They just reflect how mobile games development actually works. Because mobile games development is metric-driven and very fast-paced industry. Every feature competes for the same limited pool of time, budget, and resources. And in that environment, everything without a clear, measurable payoff gets deprioritized immediately. So, basically, accessibility in our conversation is often framed in exactly that way, that it's something that is a nice to have, nice to do, something we'll get to eventually. But you should understand that the conversation you're trying to have, it isn't landing because it's framed as a values conversation, while the room is having a business conversation. That's the core of the problem. So let's look at the specific objections just so you could understand what I'm talking about. Because understanding where these objections come from, it helps you address them in the future. Like, for instance, it's too expensive. This usually means accessibility feels undefined. Because without concrete examples, without concrete measures you offer, it sounds like a large body of work, pretty open-ended as well, and nobody wants to commit to something that they can't estimate. Or we don't have time. This means there is no connection to KPIs that measure success of the game. If it doesn't map to a metric, it doesn't make it to the sprint. We don't have time for changes that we won't be able to access. And that's where the next objection also comes from. Like the next objection, we're not sure it affects performance. This is an evidence problem. Without data or precedent or exact metric, accessibility looks like a cost with unclear return. And last but not least, our audience doesn't need it, and I'll address that one separately because it's just based on a very narrow definition of our player base. So let's start with the last one and with the most direct answer to that objection. Obviously, all of us know that players with permanent disabilities make up a significant share of any game's audience. But mobile games, they have the broadest player base of all game markets. Because they're always in our pockets, they require no dedicated hardware, and they reach demographics that console or PC games often don't. So, depending on the estimates, up to 20% of a mobile game audience can have additional accessibility needs. And that's a meaningful segment of our users, and what's even more important, are potential paying users. And also, beyond permanent disabilities, we should just think about how people actually play mobile games. For example, like somebody is on the metro and they have phone in one hand and they're holding a bag with the other hand, or someone is in a crowded cafe and it's too loud to turn on sound, so they play on mute, or someone is on a bus and just screen is shaking and they're trying to read a text on your button that is slightly too small. Like, all of that aren't some exceptions. This describes a huge share of everyday mobile sessions. And none of these players have a permanent disability, but they are in a situation that creates the same frictions that we should address. Also, we should consider the fact that mobile games are very popular with children and teenagers, and they also bring different things to the table, like different reading levels, different attention spans, different ability to pass complex user interface. And designing for these people, it's not designing for a niche audience, it's designing for our actual player base. So also another dimension that often gets overlooked in mobile development, that most projects launch in English first, or maybe with a handful of major languages, with others coming along later. But mobile games get downloaded globally from the day one, and a significant portion of our users may not understand a single word of our UI. So we should communicate what to do with clear game mechanics and clear accessible visual design. Because basically accessible design in that case bridges the gap, like, before our localization catches up with all these people who can't understand our text. So how do we move all of that into a production meeting? First, just let's point out that most mobile developers and publishers, they are already familiar with principle of good UI design, like readable typography, responsive feedback, intuitive navigation, clear visual hierarchy. These are standard quality benchmarks of the industry, but what's less obvious is that many of these principles are directly rooted in accessible design. It's just that stakeholders just don't always connect the two. So part of your job is to make that connection explicit and visible. That accessible design isn't a separate discipline, it's what good design already looks like. And from there, what you have to do is that you should let your stakeholders see that many accessibility improvements are not new features, they're improvements to systems you already have. For example, your readability, like font size options, contrast adjustments, like it's pretty low effort changes, it's a basic changes for your clarity, but that reduces friction for everyone. Or interaction feedback, like clearer visual, audio, haptic responses, all of that reduces error rates and it improves feel across all gameplay stages. Tutorial support, like optional guidance, clearer failure feedback, it directly affects early game drop-off. Or control flexibility, like remappable inputs. I think that is especially relevant for mid-core or casual plus more difficult projects. Like, this investment also have a measurable impact on completion rates on any mechanics. Also, broader device and assistive technology support. It can reduce crashes or INRs. I'll actually come back to that, why that matters later. Just beyond just stability and accessibility, that's actually way more important than it looks. But basically, what I'm talking about is that when you frame accessibility as product investment, it becomes much easier to get into a sprint. So now let's talk about why this matters financially. Accessibility improvements, they are at the very top of our monetization funnel, and everything in that funnel is connected. For example, player downloads our game. They go through the first session, they reach the tutorial, but if they can't read the UI, if the feedback isn't clear, if the flow is confusing, they churn. That's it. Just right there, before they ever reach any monetization mechanic. And when you reduce that friction, your tutorial completion goes up. A player gets further into the game, you get your first ad impression, day one retention improves, session gets longer. And overall, what's even more important, player who stays longer converts to paying user way faster and overall at higher rates. And I also think that it's worth noting that conversion failures, conversion into payment failures, are UI problems in disguise. player can miss a store prompt because of low contrast, or they can abandon a purchase because the touch target is too small. These are accessibility issues, but they show up directly in our revenue metrics. And also, we can see that all of this contributes to LTV. And you don't even need a dedicated accessibility study to make a case for your project. You just need to connect proposed changes to metrics that are already being measured in any mobile game. And also there is a platform dimension. Google Play and App Store, as I mentioned before, track crash rates and INRs as indicators of technical quality of a game. And poor scores in that department that are a direct result of lack of support for broad range of devices or assistive technology, they can suppress your organic visibility. And that increases your user acquisition costs, something that any publisher would significantly care about. So let's see how metrics mapping looks in practice. We see, for example, a clear tutorial flow improves tutorial completion that drives day one retention or first purchase conversion, first ad view, and all the product metrics after that. Better UR readability reduces player error rates. We have stronger interaction feedback, improving retention, day one retention, day 7 retention. It drives time spent, it drives ad views, and after that LTV. Or optional difficulty support that reduces early game drop-off. Again, improves long-term retention, overall monetization, funnel improvement. And broader device and assistive tech support reduces crash rates and INRs, which directly affects store visibility and organic traffic. So now let's talk about framing accessibility for different stakeholders. The same improvement needs to be presented differently depending on the audience. For example, if you talk with developers and engineers, you should be specific. Such a question can we add a font size slider to the settings menu? It will end so much better than just, we should improve accessibility, we should make text more readable. Vague requests, they get deprioritized. Specific ones, they get estimated and then put into roadmaps. And also where you can come already with solutions, not just problems. That might mean pointing to an AI tool that checks code for accessibility issues, or maybe suggesting a tool that makes testing on a screen reader or other accessibility device easier. The simpler you make it to act on, the less resistance you'll get on your accessibility improvements. Then, most importantly, with producers or product managers or game designers, you should connect accessibility to the KPIs of your project. Retention, tutorial completion, error rates, session length, depth, all of that is what matters to your producer. And that's why you should propose small and testable implementations. What I found out from my experience is that A/B testing accessibility is pretty easy sell. When you test accessibility changes against baseline metrics, it frames the whole thing as an experiment with measurable and visible result. And you can just show on numbers how accessibility is going to affect profitability of your project. And with publishers and investors, well, you can obviously start with market reach. As we mentioned, roughly 20% of players have additional accessibility needs, and we also, our particular players, they have situational impairments that expand that further. But you can also bring up platform trends. We see already that Apple and Google are increasingly surfacing accessibility as a quality signal in featuring decisions, in their user acquisition decisions. And that allows you to frame accessibility as a risk reduction and as a cost reduction for your project. Because poor usability drives negative reviews, it drives lower ratings, it drives higher early churn, and all of that is increasing user acquisition costs, and it reduces LTV, something that concerns publishers and investors directly. So to bring all of this together, you should understand that accessibility doesn't struggle to get prioritized in mobile because mobile games industry doesn't care. It struggles because it's being framed as the wrong kind of conversation. You should just connect it to the metrics and outcomes that stakeholders already measure, and then this conversation becomes so much easier to have. So before your next accessibility discussion, what you should ask yourself is, who am I talking to? What do they measure success of a game by? And if you start there and work backwards, it just gets so much easier. So always remember that accessibility and good product design and good game design, they point in the same direction. And most of the time, the only thing standing between them is how the conversation gets framed. And that's something that you can contribute to directly. So thank you for listening to my advices, and have a nice day.